We host these town halls weekly as a free space for Montessori school leaders to come together and discuss certain leadership topics. It's always free and we want people to come together. We know that it can be a bit lonely at the top and it's important to have a community of support, and thankfully technology has made that easy. Over the past year, we've had a lot of conversations about the Montessori guide shortage, and people are really struggling to find trained guides. So the topic of visa sponsorship has been requested, and we're really lucky to have a special guest speaker here today by the name of Lisa Scott, who's the founder and owner and attorney of Scott Global Migration Law Group. I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to her as she has prepared a little bit of information as to how the work visa sponsorship goes. So Lisa, you have the floor.
Great, thanks Camilla. First of all, let me explain to you that I also have Montessori certification. I think it expired about 20 years ago, but I was in your shoes at that time. My daughter, it's a story of a parent who just got too involved in her daughter's education. My daughter was in a home-based Montessori school here in Chicago with Spanish immersion. And well, the long story short, I thought I could do it better myself. So the teachers who were in that homeschool and I formed our own school, which we called Children's Village Montessori. And it was a Spanish immersion program. And don't worry, I was not the Spanish teacher. And we all, every other weekend, we would go see Sister Anthonita in Adrian, Michigan to work towards our AMS certification. But at the same time, we moved out all the furniture in my second floor of my house and we made a Spanish immersion Montessori school. And because I'm an immigration lawyer, I was able to work on the visas myself. But we had a fantastic school and it was great. I brought people in on H1b visas. We had an art teacher who we found roaming the streets of Chicago. Her boyfriend had a record store, yes, in the time of records, 2 blocks away. Somehow we took the children into the record store. We met her. We did a visa for her so she could be our art teacher on an H1b visa. We had a teacher who was from Veracruz, Mexico. She had an H1b visa. We had a cook from Guatemala who we did permanent residence for. That was a long time ago. That was in 2002. And I disbanded the school because it just seemed that we were just too much of a pioneer. People were like, why would I want my kid to be in a Spanish immersion program? That was 2002. Fast forward, I do a lot of work with Spanish immersion Montessori programs now as an immigration lawyer. And I think that's really super exciting. And I like to think of myself as ahead of the curve, but I don't really know what happened there. But I will tell you that things are probably just as difficult in obtaining visas as they were when I did it. I mean, yeah, I was lucky. I had a connection. I knew an immigration lawyer. It was me, so I could do it. But basically, the visa categories haven't changed since 2001 for Montessori teachers. And I'm not here to tell you it's going to be easy. It's going to be tricky. It's going to be difficult. But maybe I can give you some insight into some of the things to look for, maybe some places to search. And I do have some questions that people forwarded. So I'm going to try to incorporate those into my talk. But I guess as a former administrator of a Montessori school, former owner, I would say to you, probably your best bet is to find someone who's already in the United States. Okay, and that was a question. I think that is very helpful. Obviously, if you do locate someone who's in the United States, you need to know how they're in the United States. If they don't have legal status, unfortunately, there's probably not much you're going to be able to do for them. But if they happen to be here as a student, and that would be a place where I think if I had a school now, I would really mine that as my source. If I want an international educator, if only because I can't find one born here, I would look at schools. And so what are you looking for? You are looking for someone who's here, ideally an F1 status, and it's valid status, meaning they're here and they're actually enrolled in school and they've adhered to what the requirements are, which is usually a full-time course of study. What else? Well, why would you want to look at a student? Because many of the students, once they graduate, or even while they're in their school, they can obtain work permission. Yes, it is very limited if they're still in school, but if they're in an education program or early childhood psychology, and I'm thinking of things that sort of relate to the Montessori method, it might be possible for them to obtain what's called curricular practical training. And that is a permission that they get directly from the school. So there's not much you as a school need to do for that. You basically, if their school allows, we call it shortcut CPT, curricular practical training. It's usually not the first year of their program. Some programs would allow it. The CPT, it's really dependent on the school and what the school allows for CPT. Some schools fast and loose with CPT. Some schools guard it like it's like some ancient secret, okay? So it's not anything that you can do. If the school says we'll issue it, they will give the student, it's called an I-20, they will give this I-20 to the student. It will be endorsed CPT with the name of your school and the time, the dates that this person could work with your school. If you have that, you can employ that person. All right, it is limited, however. Also, if you have someone who's, is there a question? No, and feel free, I want it to be interactive, okay? I mean, I can talk forever. I'm a hired mouthpiece, I'm a lawyer, I can talk forever. And this is what I love. But if you have questions, I'm here for you. So the other is if someone's graduating from school, so either an associate's degree or a bachelor's degree or master's degree, they're entitled to what's called optional practical training. We call it OPT. That is a period where they can work as long as it's in their field. And so again, they come to you. In this case, they would come to you with a work card. It looks like a driver's license. And what you want to do, if you want to adhere to, the immigration laws, is you want to look at the dates the person could be employed. Can only employ that person during those dates, okay? But the person comes to you, carte blanche, they can work for whomever, as long as it's in their field, and you can go ahead and employ them and fill out your I-9 with that. Those, I think, are where a lot of the Montessori schools I work with, that's where they're looking. The other is if you have someone, if you approach some of the Montessori teacher training programs, often those international students, they are here in F1 status. They have I-20s, which is the form that allows them to be a student. And the Montessori Teacher Training Institute would have a curriculum requirement, and they could be issued, again, CPT, curricular practical training, to come and work at your school. Again, it's a very defined moment, but what I want to say to you is if you like that person, then you want to think about going from, okay, I see you can work for me for 6 months and then you can't, but we want you to come back. So you want to think about, as a school, doing a green card or permanent residence application, and not do what so many people do, wait till the last minute to reach out to an immigration lawyer. You want to do it right away because you have a limited time. And if you want this person to work with you on CPT, then they go back and they do whatever they have to do in school. And then you do permanent residence for them, because as part of the permanent residence program, they will get work authorization. But it takes about, right now, because we've had delays caused by the prior administration, it would take about 1.5 years for them to get work authorization. So if you have someone in curricular practical training or optional practical training, which means they're working for you, they get 1 year's permission to work for you after they finish their education. They have 1 year. You need to come to someone or figure out how to do it on your own, the permanent residence, ASAP. And I mean ASAP, because you only have that year. If you wait till the end, and the email I get, hey, Lisa, we have someone, we love this person, 2 months left on optional practical training. Well, that's not enough time for me. You need to figure this out in the beginning, because what you want, ideally, is you want the person to work for you, if it's optional practical training for 1 year, then before the optional practical training ends, way before, you start at the permanent residence. And so when the OPT, the optional practical training, ends, that person hopefully will have a work card where they can continue to work for you without interruption. Or if there's an interruption, it's not that long of an interruption. All right, that's really important there. The same thing with CPT. You might have someone who comes to you, they're in a program, they have CPT, you want them back, they want to come back. Well, then do the permanent residence, because then they can come back to you. Unfortunately, right now, it'll take about 1.5 years before they can come back to you. But the Biden administration is working on shortening that time frame. Okay, so those are some things that I'm saying to you is, if you identify someone, you usually need to move quickly. I think that's probably the best places to get, is to look for someone who's already here. Here's another thing. You find a teacher who's at another school. That person is already on an H1b visa. That H1b visa is kind of what you would consider in the US a work visa. All right. So if that person's already here in H1b status, working for another school, you can transfer that H1b visa so the person can work for your school. So I think oftentimes it's easier if you have someone who's in the United States to sort of sort out the visa possibilities. Any questions so far? Okay. So what does it take for a Montessori school? Well, my Montessori school, there was me there, and there were 2 other teachers. So it can be just you. It can be a small school. Okay. So if you're looking to hire someone on their CPT or their OPT, it doesn't really matter as long as you can employ them. If you're looking for H1B, which is the typical, sorry, my dog. Guys, please, it's embarrassing. If you're looking at H1B, so what that is the OPT and the CPT, they're very limited, they're very short in duration. So you'd really have to start for permanent residence, which is a green card, like almost right away, if you want that person to continue to work for you after the OPT or CPT duration. The other way is to look at an H1B visa. An H1B visa is, like I said, it's a work visa. It's a visa that enables a foreign national to work in the United States. So the H1B can be filed by any type of employer, as long as it's a U.S. employer. Basically, you need to be a U.S. employer for H1B status, you need a federal employer identification number, or if you're a sole proprietor, your social security number. That's it. Those are like the basic requirements. It can be a rural school, it can be a private school, it can be a public school, it can be a small school, it can be a large school, and you have to have bona fide employment opportunity. It can be a part-time teacher. It doesn't have to be a full-time teacher. You can do, as little as a couple hours a week. Let's say you want to hire, a music teacher, and you only want the person for a couple of hours a week. You could try for an H1B visa. Now, there are some other drawbacks of the H1B visa. One is it's lottery based. So if you don't find someone who's already working in the United States in H1B status, your school has to go through a lottery. So the H1B visas, every year, the US government has a lottery for 85,000 H1B visas. 60. Did you have a question?
Yes. So I have actually started to try the process to get an H1B, and I got as far as getting my application for prevailing wage determination. I got that cleared, and that seemed to be step 1. And then I got to step 2 of filing some of the other documents, and I was never able to get into the portal to submit. So
okay. Let me go back. So the H1B visa, is this for someone who's already in H1B status?
No, this is a person. We're a small school in Hawaii. We have 10 employees.
Okay.
We've been recruiting since the day we opened. So we've recruited island-wide, statewide, nationwide, and hiring teachers is really very, very difficult, even bringing them in from the mainland. So we have somebody in the Netherlands. We began this process about probably around Halloween last year. And so I had hoped to get in for the first round of lottery on January 1, and I could never get into the portal to submit documents.
Okay, so hold on a minute.
Okay.
The visa lottery now used to be April 1st. That was the day that the visa lottery would accept registrant. So basically, in order to, unless you're hiring someone who's already in the United States in H1B status,
Yes.
your person has to be, and your school has to be selected in the visa lottery. It's a
Yes.
one-time event. This year it was March 1st to March 20th. And so those are the dates in which you needed to register. So you would register your name, the name of the school, the name of the contact person, your federal employee identification number, and then some basic information about your prospective employee, the name, date of birth, country of nationality, and passport. So did you register in the visa lottery March 1st?
I could never get into it. I could never get the portal to open to register.
Okay, I know that the first couple of days of March, like March, we didn't start registering until like around March 8th, because the first couple of days, it was March 1st, I think it was March 20th this year. You were mentioning January, so I don't know what.
Well, I received when I began this process, I received a notice saying that the open period was January 1 through 3 or something like that.
Yeah.
And then I got another notice recently that said, because I was not sure if I should do an H1B or if I should do a J1. I've talked to 3 different attorney groups across the nation. There's no one in Hawaii that would touch this we want one opening. So there was no one in Hawaii that could help me. There was none of the nationwide ones that I approached would touch me because I only wanted one. We were too small.
Are you in Honolulu?
No, I'm in Lahui on the island of Kauai.
Okay, because I'm thinking about coming to a conference in Honolulu the end of next week. So I was like, we could maybe meet up and I could give you some tips.
Oh, okay.
But okay, first of all, the lottery this year, I don't know what you received. And if you email it to me, I'd like to see what it was that told you it was in January, because it was actually March 1st. And it will never be, unless there's a drastic change. Like I said, for years it was April 1st. Then under the Trump administration, it started moving around, but it was never before March 1st. So I'd like to see what it was you had. So and we can talk about the J1 because that's still not dead in the water. There might be something we can do there. So the first thing you want to do is register in that lottery. It costs you $10 to do it. Lawyers will charge you anywhere from, I don't know, $150 to a couple $1,000s. I tell people, you go and do it on your own.
Right.
It costs you $10 if you do it. Okay.
Okay.
And then if you get chosen and you want a lawyer, well, that's a different story. So anyway, so what happens is you submit the registration between March 1st and, like I said, it was March 20th, I think 12 noon Eastern Standard Time is when it closed. And then on March 31st, you'd wake up and you'd see, maybe you got an email and that meant your person was selected. So you do have to have an employee in mind when you submit for that. You can't just say any applicant. It has to be someone. So so that would be, for next year, you'd want to make sure you're in the H1b Visa lottery.
Okay. How do I register? I mean, I understand what you're saying, and I knew that I had to register, but I could never get into. And I had it told me to go to the ICERT.
Oh, okay. You're talking about the labor condition attestation, the prevailing wage. ICERT is actually a program that's administered by the U.S. Department of Labor. Where you want to be is in uscis.gov, the Department of Homeland Security.
Yeah, well, so I was told I had to, the instructions I thought I read is I had to get the prevailing wage before I could then submit some of the other documents.
Yes, you do need a prevailing wage before you can submit the H1b Visa petition. But before you can submit the H1b Visa petition, you have to be registered in the lottery and you have to be chosen in the lottery.
Well, I understand exactly what you're saying. My challenge was I couldn't get in to register.
I think that if what you want to do next year, because you can't do it for this year, you don't want to go in that first 2-3 days, because I've seen, I'll be honest, my assistant does. Any client who wants us to do it, we charge you $500 and we'll do it. I hate it. To me, it's just, you're not hiring me to be a lawyer, you're hiring me to be a clerk. So my and I'll tell you, she said $500 was not enough because it was such a challenge to get in. She
Okay.
would try different times of the day, you try
Yes.
different browsers.
Yes, I did all that.
Yeah, you avoid the
Yes.
first like 3 or 4 days because
Okay.
that's everybody and their grandparents trying to get in, it's,
Yes.
yeah. And you
Okay.
got to find that sweet spot. And yes, it is a challenge,
Okay.
but fortunately our people were able to get in. It's just, so next year, if you try it, shoot me an email and I'll send you what I have just to make sure you have the exact spot where you need to be going, where you need to be registering.
Okay.
I wouldn't worry about the prevailing wage until you get chosen, because there's a shortcut. You probably did the actual application for prevailing wage where you emailed.
Yes.
Yeah, there's a
Yes.
shortcut where you can actually look online and take a guess, of
Okay.
what the wage should be. And so if you get chosen, I can help you, without charge, figure out what that would be.
Okay.
But the J1, so how many employees do you have?
We have 10 employees
Full time?
full time.
Okay.
We would like to, we would like to hire at least one more.
Okay.
So we do have this person in mind. She was a student at the University of Manoa in Hawaii.
Okay.
And she graduated her visa for student visa ended. She went back to the Netherlands. Then she decided she would really like to come back here and work. And that's when she contacted us. Unfortunately, she was already back to her country. And so now getting back here to work is the challenge. Oh, you just froze up. So yes, so anyways, so getting her back here would be the challenge, and the way to do it. I started to say I talked to a couple other organizations. None of them would take us on, but one suggested the H1b and the other the J1. I do not really understand the difference between the two. And your screen has frozen.
Lisa, you're frozen, unfortunately.
Yes.
Hi, Frank. How are you? I'll just
Hello.
maybe pitch in. I'm not an attorney. Let's start with that.
Okay.
But I myself went through the whole process of being on an F1 visa, I-20, then I did the OPT, but that was 20 something years ago.
Okay.
So when I did it, and you graduate, they
Yes.
issue you the OPT card, which is optional practical training card, and which is valid only for 12 months. But at that point, the requirement was that you could not leave, meaning you couldn't fall out of status. So straight from F1, you go get a job at any company that's willing to sponsor you at the time. And then you have your OPT that 12 months. And during that time, you need to figure out a way to apply for H1b, which took forever at that point too. In order to, at the moment when your 1-year OPT expires, you already have your H1b on hand, which is valid for 3 years. But then the minute you exit the country, I think you forfeit that OPT. Yes. And you kind of have to start from scratch, because I remember I could not leave after my graduation, the country, because I had to kind of be here for those 12 months, because supposedly that OPT is supposed to be your practice kind of teaching or whatever you're doing. So it's optional practical training, but if you don't choose that option, then it's kind of as if you start from scratch. So that's the tricky part. What I ran into last year when somebody approached me, when I had one of the ladies that we were looking into H1b also for one of our employees, but then, one of the people I wanted to hire. But what I ran into, which I didn't think there was a requirement, they asked us as a school for all of our financials, which for me is like, what does that have to do with the other? So they asked us for our financials first before the attorney would even take the case. to see if we can, I guess, afford the teacher or their living expenses. If something happens and they can't work, can we support them? Because what they don't want to run into is that having somebody here that, yeah, maybe works for a little bit, but at one point falls out of status and then doesn't have the money to eat or live. So then you become kind of responsible, I guess, for them. So because of our financials, the attorney wouldn't even take the case because she said, well, you guys don't make enough to be financially responsible for that person. So then we kind of had to let it go. But then again, I'm very familiar with the H1b visa because both my husband and I, we kind of that's how we got here. But J1, I would like to explore that because I don't know much about that.
Yes.
As well as another visa that I've never heard about that I was approached about last month is an EB2 visa, which is for Australian nationals. So since you're in Hawaii, maybe, Australia, somebody from there is closer to you. But that's another visa, which I heard is also a lot easier to obtain than H1B or J1 due to some kind of an agreement between US and Australia. But I wanted to hear more from the attorney here about J1 and how is the process different, or what is the likelihood of getting it? Because my own H1B visa whole process back then, again, 20 years ago, you would get your OPT 12 months, H1B visa, which is only valid for 3 years. Then you're allowed to extend it for another 3 years. So that totals up to 3 years. To 6 years, and then when you're in your an extension, so those second round of 3 years, while you're doing that, you're at the same time you're filing for a green card because that takes 2 years or so. So you hope that by the end of your second cycle of 3 years, you're kind of gonna get your green card. But then what kicks in is the matter of what country are you from, because all of my friends are from different countries, and then I'm from Poland, so the waiting list there was different. My husband's from Turkey, the waiting list for the Turkish nationals were different. My best friend is from India, and she waited 14 years on an H1B visa to get a green card. So it also depends. I don't know what is it in Netherlands for the person you're talking about, but then so you have to think about, okay, 6 years they're going to be on H1B visa. And then what? Like, what is the waiting list for each country also? Because every country has a different backlog.
All right, so H1B visa, you're right.
Shut up.
So,
okay,
I'm back somehow. Sorry. But I want to talk to you about the J1. So maybe we need to go offline and I'll give you some ideas on how to make that work, Frank. But okay, so the H1B visa, a couple things, 2 cornerstones. Well, 3 things. 1, there's a lottery. Okay.
Right.
Lottery period. 2, H1B, it's a visa petition you can file for a role that requires at least a bachelor's degree, the equivalent of a US bachelor's degree. So if the person doesn't have a bachelor's degree here in the United States, do they have equivalent either academically or academic and experience? Then it must be in a specific field. It can't just any bachelor's degree, and it's got to be a related field. Early childhood education, education, elementary education, psychology. Some of these, think about Montessori method. Think about Maria Montessori. What can you make an argument where a bachelor's degree in a specific field? All right. I think, chemistry might be tough unless they're going to be teaching something in the sciences. Even then it might be, but if you can.
Lisa?
Yes.
I have gone through this and I was able to use AMS's requirement for a bachelor's degree to any bachelor's degree to be that credentialed employee. So if you're saying I need a full Montessori credentialed teacher, and AMS says a full Montessori credentialed teacher is any bachelor's degree plus the Montessori training, then you can use that.
Okay.
So it did not have to specifically be.
And when was this that you did that?
Our employee is in her second year of her second term of H1B.
And what was her degree in?
Business.
Ooh, okay. Okay.
Right.
All right, because my understanding is that, and where I've had luck is when I've been able to link the degree requirement, you know, the field of study with, because
Yeah.
typically, I mean,
Ex-
that's great that you were able to get around that.
It's just showing the evidence
Mhm.
from AMS that this is what we need for
Mhm.
a full credential, and AMS requires any bachelor's degree.
Okay.
And for us to say, why do we need a full credential? Well, this full credential teacher will be a mentor teacher to future interns.
Mhm.
And so she needs that bachelor's degree if they also, the intern, will have a bachelor's degree.
Right. The standard for an H1B is that the role require a bachelor's degree in a specific field, and that the person have that. And again, if it's not a U.S. degree, it can be the equivalent of a U.S. degree, and you can get that done through an education evaluator. Okay. The other thing is that the school has to be willing and must pay what's called the required wage. Now, that is the higher of either what the school offers teachers who are in similar positions with similar backgrounds, or the prevailing wage, which is what, Frank, what you were trying to get. So it's the higher of the two. So it's not that you have to pay the prevailing wage, it's that you have to pay the required wage. So if your prevailing wage is 20,000, but you pay teachers similarly situated as the teacher you're trying to bring in, you pay them 25,000, then the required wage would be 25,000. So you want to be careful of that. Okay.
Right.
Again, another thing is that it's for part-time, full-time. It's a lottery. And so the lottery happens, well, now it happens 3 times a year. It used to just happen once. So it should happen 3 times if there are not enough applicants. But it's important to understand that in no way will the work start date begin before October 1st of that year. The October, that what this is all about is every year the fiscal government, I mean the government, the U.S. government, their fiscal year starts on October 1st. That's when H1b visa numbers are reallocated, and you can, because you can file 6 months in advance. That's why that April 1st start date. It used to be the lottery date. Now it's, you can file for the H1B, but you will not. The person cannot work for you before October 1st. They can come in, however, 10 days prior. Okay, but not to work for you. Okay. And then someone was saying when I got reconnected, okay, yeah, the H1B is for a maximum of 6 years. That is true in general. Now, if a person spends any time outside of the United States while in H1B status, you can add that time on, because it's 6 years physically present in the United States. Okay, so anytime, like if they go on vacation for a couple of months, you can add that on. The other thing is, if you've started permanent residence, if you started an application for a green card, and you've started that at least 365 days before the 6-year period ends, then you can extend the H1B status until either the person gets permanent residence or it's denied. What I say to people is, you don't have to file for permanent residence as soon as the person starts with you in H1B status, but I would suggest you start by the beginning of the 4th year. By that time, you should have enough time as a school administrator to figure out, is this a person, a keeper? That person probably has enough time to say, do I really want to commit to this? Okay. But I would say, like, if you wait to the 5th year, you're really going to have a problem. That person might have to leave the country, and eventually you can get them back, but you're going to have a huge interruption there. So if you are able to get an H1B visa, and if you are able to get, argue the AMS or AMI standards that you can use any degree. And I don't know if that was particular to that officer, or if that's something, and I'll do some research if that's something that is just recognized there, because I'm wondering, Robin, if that was just a one-off with that particular officer. I don't know. I also don't know what you submitted. So I would caution about just saying a bachelor's degree in any field, but I will check in that. Okay. Because the regulations say it's a bachelor's degree in a specific field.
Yeah.
And
so Lisa, we submitted documentation from the training center, documentation from AMS. I forget if we also did documentation from MACD.
Did you submit any documentation of was this person an experienced Montessori school teacher?
Yes. Well,
How many years?
the training was done with us, but she also had worked at a Montessori school before coming to the country,
And for
which
how
is
long?
what it 3 years, I believe.
Okay, because when you don't have a degree, Homeland Security will look at what have you done, work experience, and oftentimes what we'll do is we'll do an evaluation. And for every 3 years of work experience, it equals 1 year of university. So if you have 3 to 6 years in Montessori, they may have looked at, I don't know, really, Robin, I'd have to see what it was. I'm a little wary of saying, hey, any degree. I'm wondering if in your particular situation, because your person already worked as a teacher, if they didn't say, if Homeland Security didn't look at that and say, well, this person has a related type of bachelor's degree. And again, I'd have to see the entire filing. I don't know if you've got a request for evidence. I'd want to see that as well. Yeah, so I'd have to see that whole thing. I think that's a great argument if it works. I just don't know if that's going to work on like a nationwide scale. So for now, I'm going to say that the bachelor's degree should be related to the position and the person should have that. You know, it should be in a specific field that relates to the position. Or it can be an experience and education evaluation that would come up with something that's related to a Montessori school. There are some others that you should be aware of. You might come across someone who's in J2 status. That is, if it's a spouse of someone who's here in J1 status, someone who might be working at a university or doing research for the national government might be here in J1 status. The good news for you is that a spouse in J2 status can apply for an employment authorization document and you can hire that person. The other is if you have someone who's in temporary protected status, that person might come to you with an employment authorization document and you can hire that person as well. If all else fails and you locate the ideal person and none of these options work, you can try to bring the person in as a permanent resident. That's someone with a green card. The only caveat there is that comes into the United States with a green card, while they're supposed to intend to work with you and you're supposed to hire them, when they have a green card, they're actually, I mean, they're because we don't have indentured servitude, they're actually free to go work with whomever. So I would be kind of cautious if you decided to commit the kind of funds and time into trying to bring someone here as a permanent resident with a green card. Someone asked, I'm sorry.
Lisa, sorry, could I jump in really quick with my question? You mentioned J2. I have a current employee. She is our Spanish specialist.
Okay.
She is on a J2 visa. Her husband has a J1.
Okay.
He did apply for the lottery for the H1b. I'm not sure if he got it or not. But she tells me her J2 expires in August and she's at a loss of what I'm supposed to do to get that extended.
So her J2 expires in August, probably because the underlying J1 expires in August because they're linked. This is one where is the J1 eligible for an extension?
Yes, I believe that's true. Yes.
Okay, so if the J1 is eligible for extension, and so then the J2 would be eligible for extension. The J2 can apply for new EAD. And then how do you pronounce your name?
Jay.
Jay. Then Jay, I would, in your case, if you like this person, I would look, if you want to continue to hire this person beyond, I would look at permanent residence, because with the permanent residence in about 18 months, the individual should have employment authorization. And so, because right now the J2 is, the length of stay is predicated on the length of stay for the J1. I don't know what the situation is for the J1. I mean, J1, you know, there's if it's a researcher, it's usually a 5-year max. I mean, if it's a
I don't know. He works for Google. But I know they're like planning to return to Spain in January of 2024.
Okay.
So, but I do know they were interested in the green card. I don't know. But I'm just mostly interested if I can get her
How long has she been with you?
She's been with us since last August.
Okay.
Is that right? Yeah.
Okay. All right. So if the person's with Google, I'm going to guess it's an 18-month that the person is here as a trainee, the J1, and has a maximum 18 months, which can't be extended beyond the 18 months. So, and you're saying August, that would be 12 months. Yes. And then the person could get another 6-month extension, which would take you into the beginning of next year. So there's nothing independently that you can do. But if the J1, if Google extends, if they decide to extend the training program for the additional 6 months, because they can get a maximum 18 months, then the J2 would be extended, then the J2 can apply for employment authorization.
Okay, so it's really dependent on what happens with her husband, it sounds like.
Unless you're looking like long-term, but if they're going back to Spain, then yeah.
Okay, all right.
The other thing would have been, if the person had the equivalent of a U.S. bachelor's degree, you could have tried in the lottery, but we missed the lottery this year. But keep in mind, there is a lottery every year. It tends to be in March. So in January, start looking for things about the H1b Visa lottery. And that might be something that you can use for some future employees.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
I wanted to jump into, I had my hand raised for a question.
I'm sorry.
Take this off in the office. No problem. I have somebody who's here. They have a student visa. However, they recently applied for TPS because they're from Venezuela.
Okay.
Which has allowed them to cut their class load down. They can go like half part-time.
Right.
So in their current program, they're due to graduate in 2024. And, I'm just wondering, what would you recommend is the best course for us to follow to help this person? We want them to be here and they want to work with us. Because you talked a lot about the permanent residency option, but what is that process like versus the H1b?
Okay, so this is permanent residence. Pretty much it's going to be the same cut across all the schools. It is usually a 2-step process. The first step is called PERM. Acronym, permanent employment something. This is the part where you, as the employer, the school, you have to fulfill recruitment requirements that are set forth by the U.S. Department of Labor. Are you hearing? Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Yes.
You're breaking up. So you said the first step is called.
So the first is it's called PERM. It's an application.
PERM.
Yeah, PERM. PERM, like money. It is an application that the school or the employer. It's an employer-driven application. Basically, the idea behind it is that the school, through a series of prescribed recruitment efforts, has to document and demonstrate to the U.S. Department of Labor that it's not displacing a U.S. worker by offering this foreign national permanent type employment. So how do you do that? Well, the Labor Department has come up with this application called, it's the initial step in permanent residence. It is the initial step in a green card application. So basically, going back a little, to get permanent residence in the United States, typically you get it through employment or through family. There's also through asylum and a few other things, but you've come to me for employment. So employment typically involves this PERM application, which you file with the Department of Labor. You have to fulfill certain recruitment requirements. You also must be offering the job at what is considered the required wage. Again, you have to figure out what the prevailing wage is, what your wage is, and what the required wage is, which is the higher of the two. You have to do the recruitment provisions, which typically for a Montessori school will be the Sunday paper. So you find the paper with the largest circulation in your area. If they have a Sunday edition, it's 2 print editions, okay? In my practice, you must do the print editions. I never do the online because, I don't know who's listening, but honestly, nobody looks for a job in the print editions. Okay, so, and you're fulfilling the requirements of the Labor Department. So we are doing what's legal here, okay? The other thing is you must advertise for 30 days with what is considered your state's unemployment office. if you shoot me this, send me an email, what state you're in, I can tell you where to go for that. And you must place a notice internally, and you have to do some other recruitment efforts. So once you've done all of that, you have the prevailing wage, you submit the application through to the U.S. Department of Labor. The whole process right now takes about 14 months to get that. Okay, once you get that, and that's assuming that the Labor Department doesn't ask follow-up questions, it'll be about 14 months. Once you get that, then typically, unless the person you're trying to help is born in India or China or the Philippines, which has their own sort of backlog in applications, you can typically file for permanent residence with that certification with the perm. As part of that, you as a school, you have to show you can pay the salary that the Labor Department says you have to pay. If you've already paid that teacher the salary because the teacher's been able to work, you show the W-2 or the 1099 saying, hey, we've already paid this. This means we can pay it. If you haven't paid it, you submit your income tax return, and you have to show a net profit or net current assets that equal or exceed that required wage minus anything you've paid that person while they were in legal status, okay? So you have to show, this started, I think, in 1990, before it was like, I guess Congress thought people were just doing it for their relatives. Now you have to show you actually can pay this person. Then so that application that the school files that's based on that certified perm makes the person eligible to immigrate. Then the person actually has to file to immigrate. That's filed along with the petition the school files, and it's called Form I-485. And so that person, if the person's in legal status in the United States, and they haven't been arrested, or if there's some arrests, they make sure that these are not disqualifying arrests, and they're what's called admissible to the United States, meaning that there's a litany of questions they have to answer on this form. If they answer yes to any of those, they could have a problem getting a green card in the United States. But basically, you file all of that, and then the process is you'll get the filing receipts. The person will get fingerprinted and photographed. That will be the FBI clearance. The person will get a work card. That's probably 5 to 7 months into that second part of the application. And ultimately, the person gets a green card. What you need to understand is when the person has a green card, and even possibly before then, the person is not indebted to you. They can actually leave, okay? So, yeah, but I've done this for some of my own employees, and I've had the most loyal employees who only left, me after 14, 15 years because, they had families or whatever. And yes, I've done it for people who've left right away, but, but that's the process.
Thank you.
We have a few other questions in the
that?
chat. Here's a question. If I sponsor a student to go through AMI training for 3 years over 3 summers who was an au pair here in the US, how can I apply? Can I apply for an H1b for her? The AMI training center cannot issue her a student visa.
Okay, well, and first of all, the J1 au pair program, some of the countries, and I think one of them is Romania and a few other countries. The one thing you want to be careful with the J1, even if you decide to bring someone in on a J1, is that some countries will require the J1 visa holder to go home. That means go back to the country of last residence or country of nationality for 2 years before that person can either get an H1B or permanent residence. So that's the first line of inquiry is the J1 visa holder, from what country is that person and what was the last country of residence? And then you have to look and see, does either of those require the individual to go home for 2 years? Because if that happens, that person cannot get H1B status or a green card until that person's either gone home or has fulfilled the requirements by getting what's called a no objection letter from his or her home country. So you want to be careful, but let's assume that this one does not. So it's an au pair. Most countries do not have a 2-year residence requirement for someone who comes in au pair, but there are some countries that do. So I just wanted to be familiar with that. But let's assume this one is from a country that doesn't, England, and you want this person. So what you're looking at for H1B is you're looking at, does the individual have the equivalent of at least a US bachelor's degree. And again, I would say in a specific field, and does that field relate to the job you're offering? And then, yes, you can go through the visa lottery. Again, remember, it's a visa lottery. So it really is a lottery. There are 85,000 H1b visas given out in that lottery. 20,000 are reserved for those who have advanced US degrees, okay? So you've got 65,000. So I would say in the last few years, the probability of being chosen is about 33% if you have the equivalent of a US bachelor's degree. And then you would enter the lottery and you would put your school, your federal employer identification number, your contact person, the name of the proposed employee. If that's all chosen in the lottery, then you can file the H1b visa petition. So just getting chosen in the lottery doesn't mean your petition is going to be approved, okay? You still have to file a petition. And then you file the petition. And remember, it's for a work start date that doesn't start before October 1st. So that person may have to leave the country and come back in with an H1b visa, okay? So there, I mean, yes, it's possible, but you have to look at all these other things, okay? First is J1, you have to go home for 2 years. If you do, can you waive that application? You know, do you have the AMS? Do you have the equivalent of a US bachelor's degree? Again, I say in a specific field, and it has to relate. Are you paying that required wage? Go in the lottery, spend the $10, go in the lottery. If the school's chosen and the person's chosen, then file the H1b visa petition, and just understand that the work start date is October 1st of that year, assuming the petition is approved by then, okay?
Great. We have another question here from Jacqueline. Are there any particular pathways that are specific to Canadians that make it easier for them to get work authorization in the US?
Bummer, no. There is a TN for Canadians, but it's for teachers in not in Montessori schools. So that's kind of a bummer. And the one thing about Canadians, though, is that they don't need visas. So what does that mean? So the visa is the actual thing in your passport. So what happens with the H1B, and you do the same for Canadians, you go in the lottery. If the H1B visa is chosen and then you file the visa petition, you'll get an approval notice, okay? So if your person's out of the country with that approval notice, they have to make an appointment to go to the US Embassy in their home country. And during COVID, that was like the hardest thing to do. Like I have somebody, we filed an H1B visa petition in the lottery in 2020, and he still hasn't entered the country because he hasn't been able to get his visa stamp. Now, Canadians, as soon as they have the approval notice, they come in. They don't have to go to the US Embassy or consulate because they don't need visas. Only country where you don't need a visa to come in to work in H1B status, but you still need the approval notice. You still have to go through the lottery. You still have to have the approval notice.
Okay, great. We have another question here. Is there a particular place or training in other countries that you're having luck to bring a teacher to the USA? I guess that's a general question.
You know, what I say is for J1, you want to avoid, unfortunately, China and India, because they do have a 2-year foreign residence requirement, and that can be difficult to waive. Philippines also, because we have more applicants. So for our permanent residents, for our green cards, we have a certain numerical allotment limitation on green cards every fiscal year, just like with H1Bs. But what we have with green cards is we have certain countries where we have more applicants than we have green cards for them. So we have like a backlog. So if you think of like when you used to go in the grocery store, you saw the red box, you're like, man, I want that chocolate chip cookie, but there are 10 people in front of me. I got to grab a number and wait for my number. Well, that's what happens with people born in China, India, and the Philippines is basically once you file the perm and the I-140, they get that number and then they have to wait to file the final part of their application. So I think those can be challenging, especially if they try to come on J1 because they have the 2-year home residence requirement. If you can't waive it, they can't get H1B. But if you're looking to H1B, then I don't think that one country is easier than the other. It really is a lottery. I mean, you want to maximize your chance. You're looking for someone who has an advanced US degree. There you get a maximum chance of H1B. So the other thing is if you find someone who's already in the United States and is in H1B status, or maybe a few years ago had H1B status, then went to F1, you might be able to go back to that old H1B status and avoid the lottery. So, you know, dig around. What is their immigration background? Have they ever had H1B status? When? You might be able to harness on that. So.
Okay, great. Another question here. Are there pathways for Ukrainian Montessori teachers who've been displaced to come to the US and teach?
There is TPS for Ukrainians. You know, the thing is, it takes a while. We were just all, you know, lawyers, we were venting and saying, oh yeah, great. You know, there's TPS. Everyone thinks you can start working right away. No, you need a work card. So, and that takes a while. So, you know, and now those who were trying to come in through Mexico, that pathway seems to be closed now. You know, and so I would say it's great reading these things in the newspaper, but in reality, not happening that quickly.
Another question here from Carmita. We have a couple coming from the Czech Republic. He's American, she's German, with a 10-year-old expired green card. We applied for an H1B for her, but was not chosen. Any thoughts on what's next?
So the person has an expired green. So there's one American. So the spouse is an American. The other one has an expired 10-year green card. There might be a possibility, it depends on how long they've been out of the country. The one with the expired green card might be able to file an I-90 for a replacement green card. Without more facts, without knowing how long the green card holder's been out of the country, hard for me to say. Some people who just happen to be abroad, they haven't been gone very long, their green card expires, they can come back in, they filed for an extension of the green card by filing an I-90, they can use that receipt to come in. But again, fact specific, if that green card holder has been out of the country for 5 years, it's possible that green card holder abandoned his or her residence. So I can't give you like the legal opinion on that. Yeah.
Another question here from Wally. If one has a CPT or OPT, is the next step to apply for a green card? Is the minimum period for this 18 months? What is the timeline for hiring someone who is not in the US?
Okay, well, wait, if someone is OPT or CPT, they're in the US. So, so I would say the process for permanent residence is as I described. It's the perm application, and then typically you file the I-140 and the I-45 together, and as part of that, your person will get work authorization. I say that takes about 18 months minimum to get the work authorization. So if the OPT is 12 months, ideally you want to start as soon as possible, because otherwise you're going to have some interrupted time where the person can't legally work for you. With CPT, it depends. Like if you have CPT and you like the person and the person's going back to school, you might want to do permanent residence so they can come and work for you once school is over. But remember, you know, as an administrator, as an employer, if you do a green card for someone and everyone intends to work together, they could still go somewhere else. So it's a big chunk of money and a lot of time. So you really want to think about that. Yeah, it's like for me, when I do it, you know, I know what I'm doing. It's kind of easy for me, but still I have to pay for the advertisement fees. So I look at the person like, are you someone who might stick around for a while? Because I'm going to be out of pocket some of the money. Because for most of these processes, the employer is paying. So for like the H1B, the employer is required to pay the legal fees and the filing fees. For the permanent residence, the employer is required to pay any fees associated with that first step, the perm application, which is, if you're using a lawyer as a legal fee, it's at minimum, if you're doing it yourself, it's an advertising fee. And those advertising fees, because you're paying for the print Sunday paper, is usually about $2,000. So it's a big chunk of money. So you want to make sure that you've got someone where there's maybe some loyalty or allegiance. I mean, that's at least from my perspective. But I don't want to say, yeah, let's just do permanent residence. Yeah, in my world, yeah, we do permanent residence. We help everyone. That's wonderful. But we have to be real. You know, we're in a business situation. So, and how long does it take to bring someone? So let's say you want to bring someone from out of the country. You want to bring them as a permanent resident. It's a little hard to, I used to say 18 to 24 months. Then with COVID thing, you know, it depends now what embassy. where they're going to process. So basically, if they're outside of the United States, you do the perm here, then you do the I-140 where the school shows it can pay the salary. And then the last part is the person's going to be interviewed in his or her home country or country of nationality. A lot of when that person will be interviewed depends on what that country is. Some countries are still, we're getting little notices, COVID. We're sorry, we've operations COVID. We're like, wait, that's from 2020 and 2021. But some embassies are still, if it's China, I think you've got some challenges there and how long it's going to take. So I could say it could be up to 3 years, depending on the embassy where that person will be interviewed.
We have another question here from Jacqueline. Are you able to touch on the process for EB-5 Immigrant Investor Program?
The only thing is I stay away from, I don't like that. In what context, is someone going to start a Montessori school? If someone wants to email me offline, I can connect you with someone. It's that I don't like the EB-5 program myself. I think there are usually ways to work around that without having a chunk of your money tied up and not knowing if you're going to get it back. So,
all right, we'll finish up with these 2 final questions. The first one is, when working with students, who should we contact at their university to ask about CPT? And then the second question is, how long is it taking for spouses of Americans to receive work authorization?
Okay, so for CPT, it's incumbent upon the actual national student to go to the designated student officer at the international office or whatever they call it at the university or college. That person makes those inquiries, okay? And then they come to you with a form that says it's an I-20 form, and you flip it over and you'll see the name of your school and the dates that CPT has been granted, okay? And then you can hire that person. As for how long, if a person is married in the United States and they're married to a US citizen, and they filed their permanent residence application, I'm estimating right now that we are seeing work cards between about 5 and 9 months. Unfortunately, very few ways to expedite that. If you happen to be a nonprofit school, then I suggest that you give the person a letter and you explain what it is you need. If you need the person to teach because you're going to lose money, you're going to lose students, then I think you give the person, the applicant can then call the customer service number of Homeland Security and basically throw his or herself at the feet of the person who answers the phone. I was able to do it recently for a client because my daughter's little dog started yapping. I was so embarrassed. Well, it turned out the officer has his daughter's little dog. And I was like, yeah, my daughter left the dog. He's like, yeah, me too. And we just connected on that. So remember, these are people. Try to find some way of connecting. I've talked about blueberry pie. I'll talk about whatever I think will get the officer to smile, because that officer writes up the summary and sends it to the one who makes the decision. And you want that to have a whole bunch of smiley faces so that the next person's like, yeah, I'm going to do it. Okay. But otherwise it's tough. It's tough to get an expedite, but if there are children involved, if some of the children, this is going to sound terrible and maybe kind of exploitation, but like I said, I won't stop anything. The children lost a parent or something from COVID, I would put it in there. We really need this teacher because we need to have a smaller teacher-student ratio. We have a few students whose parents, and then I would get into that and explain like how that, affects a psychological being. Use whatever.
So Lisa, you're saying the school should call Homeland Security?
No. The person should call, but the person should have a letter, because sometimes they'll ask for documentation. But when the person calls, Robin, I would say, hey, you know what? I'm going to be working at this school. The school has told me this. They have some parents who are police officers, and and they've been ill, or they've been this or that, and I have a letter I can provide you. And tell the person to try to get a read on whomever answers the phone. You want to just kind of start to tell people, well, had a guy, it was the company, I had them do it first, and it's, you know, they import fruits and produce. And I mean, you know, you go to the supermarket and there wasn't any, right? Well, he called and he just fell flat. He couldn't get it going. I'm like, this is your business. And so I called and I said to the officer, well, you know, when was the last time you went to the grocery store? You know, well, just yesterday. I was like, well, you know, I love blueberries, and there weren't any blueberries. And we started talking about blueberries and blueberry pie. And you know, it's just sort of take your hint from, you know, the person. If it's a nonprofit, I would make the call where I'm with the person so that you're ready to talk if the person wants to talk to you. That's
okay. Yeah, we're a nonprofit, and
you know, they may not want to talk to you, but I would still be there.
Okay.
Because if they know that you're ready and you're ready to say whatever it is that the applicant is saying, I think that helps with the credibility. And then if you get denied, I'd try it again. You know, if you could try, you know, since you're a nonprofit, you could try contacting a senator and telling, so the applicant needs to fill it out because there's all this privacy stuff now. And they could say, I'll be working with XY, it's a nonprofit, this is their focus, this is, you know, this is their audience, this is what's going on, this is why they need me, please help. And, you know, it might help if to a letter from your school. Do you have one that's pending like this, or you're just thinking?
Yeah. This is my question, because I have one teacher that I have sponsored in the process of the perm, a second teacher that was married last year, and because of filing, the office is being closed, it took her almost a whole year to file for her work visa, and so it's been filed, or her work authorization.
Okay. This is
but
based
she's
on permanent on the perm, or this is based on marriage?
This second one is based off of marriage. And there's two teachers I'm working with. So the second one is based off of marriage, and her work authorization has been, I mean, it's been turned in. And she's currently working as a practicum student. So the OPT.
Wait, there is something I read not that long ago. There is something about, let me just see if I can find it. And I didn't pay attention because I didn't have any clients having this, but I read something recently about there's some expedite criteria. And one of them had to do with children. And if you could get yours into that, let's see. What was one of the recent something, I think they, wait, I saw it and it just was like, Camilla, is there any way I can get this to Robin once I find it?
You can attach it in the chat.
You're assuming a level of technical competency that I don't have. I gotta find it first, and I think the chat will be over.
Robin, you can find Lisa's email address on her website and maybe send her an email. Maybe she can attach it in a response.
Okay.
And I also put my email address in there.
Wait, here it is. Oh yeah, here it is, right here. If you are a healthcare worker or childcare worker who has a pending I-765, you can request expedited processing. And 39, hold on a minute, 39, I'm sure that 39, that's where I would go. I mean, I know we don't want to say we're, you know, I mean, it's a school, but I mean, Robin, how old is this, 3 to 6 year olds, or what do we got?
Yep, she's currently our toddler teacher, 2-year-old.
I would say that, you know, I would do this. I would call up and say, I am requesting an expedited EAD based on the fact that I am a qualifying child, and which includes workers who attend to children at schools. and perform a variety of tasks such as dressing, feeding, bathing, and overseeing play. It says it doesn't include preschool teachers or teaching assistants, but it does say attend to children at schools. So I would still do it. I would say I'm a child care worker and I am for an expedited EAD. I don't think they're going to ask anything because I am a child care worker.
Okay.
Great, Lisa. Thank you so much. I did drop the link to Lisa's website. You can find her email and phone number there as well if you want to ask her any questions or just get in contact with her if you're looking to sponsor a work visa. Thank you so much, Lisa, for your time, your expertise, and just answering everyone's questions. I think everyone found this helpful. I'm seeing some thank yous in the chat, so thank you. And thank you for everyone who joined. We'll see you at next week's town hall, which will be an open forum. So have a great rest of your Thursday.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Take care. Bye.
Lisa, you had your hand up. Did you have something else?
I wanted to ask Robin if she'd be willing to share that. I'd love to look at that to see, you know, you can redact
Yes.
whatever.
What to see what?
That H1b where you said, I'd like to see what was, you said you got a request for evidence on that?
Yes. And I kind of answered it in the chat, but I added the AMS letter that they sent me as this is what we are looking for, and the requirement for a full credential is in process. AMS is now requiring the full credential. But also I had to show evidence of job postings that said bachelor's degree required.
Okay.
And so just going on to our Montessori, local Montessori association, basically everyone said bachelor degree. It didn't say bachelor's in child development or bachelor's in, but it just said bachelor's degree.
Okay, I'm going to look at that because that's the first I've heard where I've seen a lot of, like, if you were doing this one and you were in business administration, like, no, that's not a specific field, that's too broad. So I think that's, I don't, if that's a one-off or if that's just, you know, something, I don't know. I want to look into that though.
Yeah, I can definitely send you, I mean, because there was a request for documentation. And so, yeah. I mean, I did all the documentation, and this was, we went through the two H1Bs for her, and our perm application has been filed.
Great. Good. All right. And where's your school?
California.
All right. Place I'd love to live. Where in California?
The San Francisco area.
Okay. All right. Okay. Yeah. All right. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you, Lisa. And thank you for everyone who asked some great questions. I hope this was helpful.
Okay.
Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you. Bye-bye.